Elmhurst, our community. We're coming to you from the Community Bank of Elmhurst and the Business Zone. I'm Ken Bartels, your host. We're very happy to be with you today. Today I've got two very good friends and colleagues who were with me on the first show 2 years ago in April of 2019. And I've asked them to come back today because I think a few things have been going on between then and now. My two guests are Erin Jason, the Business Development Coordinator for the City of Elmhurst, and John Quigley, President and CEO for the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So what's been going on, gang? You know, I mean...
I remortgaged my home and I became eligible for Medicare. Erin?
Well, I'm double vaxxed. That's exciting. I know you gentlemen are too. Who knew we'd be so excited about being vaccinated?
Yep.
You know, I was thinking about the program in April of 2019. I even went back and looked at a part of it. And we were talking about economic development in Elmhurst, and things were going well. But I had forgotten a lot of what was going on then and what's transpired. We were talking about the downtown developments, Lennar, now the Flynn, just sort of starting up. And, you know, we were still talking about, you know, vacancy rates and new businesses and what have you, with no idea of what was ahead of us. But it's interesting because when you think about 2019 and 2020, a lot went on that set the stage for then the complete collapse. But before we get to pandemic stories, I wonder what the two of you remember about that period of time. John, you want to start?
You know, I just remember that people are starting to get sick. They're not quite sure. Is it going to spread in the United States? Will it spread around the world? And then it doesn't really start to come through until you go, oh, we can't do that live event. We're done. We're shut down. You know, our gala is normally the last Friday in January. That's a big event for us. That's gone. We're hoping to do it at the end of July this year. You know, so it's those kinds of things where once it starts affecting your daily office procedures and your event procedures and those kinds of things, that's when you suddenly go, ooh, this could be a lot more serious than I think.
Now, the tenor of our program in 2019 though was very upbeat. Things were going well, and we were optimistic about what was going on in Elmhurst.
Well, you mentioned the Finn, the Lennar
Right.
project, and it's funny that we sit here now 2 years later, and today the first residents are moving into the Finn. And I just think, like, with all that's transpired in those 2 years, we are still seeing developments like the Finn come to our doorstep and say we want to happen in Elmhurst. So pandemic or not, everything that's transpired in between, at this time in 2019, I would have been working with businesses on their sidewalk cafes. And after the pandemic year of 2020, we did an expansion of cafes, and we're continuing that this year with the consent of the City Council. So I spent my whole morning working with everyone on where are we going to place barricades, and we would have never been talking about having seats on parking spaces 2 years ago. So it's really neat to think of that movement. But I'm still very optimistic. I'm still very upbeat. We have a lot of positive things still happening.
Well, and we're going to talk later about how the city has fared during the pandemic and now tremendously as we start to pull out of the pandemic. But I still want to stay focused a little bit on the earlier time. So when did the two of you first hear the word pandemic as it related to COVID-19? I remember exactly where I was when I heard it.
Well, for me, it was March.
Okay.
You know, there were cases growing, but I never thought it would become a pandemic. I thought it would become an issue, and I thought our federal government and the CDC would respond in such a fashion that we cut it off at the knees. Instead, the pitch was, oh, it'll be gone in 15 days. Yeah. And obviously, that wasn't quite an accurate prediction. And so we did an event in March, our business after hours, and after that, it was nothing.
Yeah, I remember I just happened to be at my computer, and a news feed came up that the World Health Organization had officially declared it a pandemic, which of course at that point didn't really mean or trigger anything either, because as you said, oh yeah, we may have to be careful for a few weeks or this kind of thing, and then obviously it took over before that. I remember in this room in January of 2020 at the State of our City, there was the briefest of mentions about the virus in China. I mean, that's pretty much all it was, well, yeah, we've got this virus in China. And then, less than 2 months later, we're all shut down. So the pandemic comes, and not only does the pandemic come, but along with it, great unemployment, tremendous uncertainty, obviously, illness, but then we also wind up getting social unrest and a lot of other factors. I mean, let's face it, the pandemic did not cause the downtown businesses in Elmhurst to board up. That was a tough stretch, and there's obviously a lot to be resolved in that regard. What do you recall about the social unrest, the heightened area of social unrest, particularly as we sit here just a few days removed from the George Floyd verdict? What do you remember about downtown Elmhurst at that point?
So for me, throughout the pandemic, that one-on-one personal connection with our businesses was paramount. And so I was in almost daily conversation with all of our city center businesses at that point. And the biggest thing I remember is that things were being planned for Elmhurst. Peaceful protest was being planned. They had worked with the city and so on and so forth. And the night before, Naperville had theirs. And while there was many people who came there peacefully to assemble, at the end of it, there was those who were there to cause panic and chaos and did significant damage to many Naperville businesses. And my phone was just lighting up. That evening before, I was at home with my husband and came on the news about Naperville, and he's like, well, your phone's about to get busy. And I looked, and it was just ringing off the hook because people were very concerned and very nervous. On the flip side of that, I think it helped us to continue strengthening our relationship with the business population, that we were going to be able to listen to their concerns. There was so much false information also coming in about different groups coming from different areas that were going to, I think I saw something on Facebook that said, Oak Brook's under attack right now. Stores are, windows are being crashed. Next stop is Elmhurst. And so there was just this heightened, everybody's just on edge at that point. And so I think it was a really good exercise for me and my coworkers. I think we always pride ourselves on working well together throughout the pandemic, and particularly during the times of civil unrest. It has really strengthened our relationships and our just like frank conversations of what can we do, what can't we do, and how do we execute this right now. I think we were better prepared for that because when the governor did call, and announce and say, hey, we're closing restaurants for 2 weeks, and now we're closing this, and now we're closing schools, we had already started that immediate connection with businesses and each other in ways that we had not so seriously before.
Your phone light up too, John?
Yeah, and actually my phone was lighting up from media, wanting to know what I knew, what was going on, those kinds of things. Two things I'll say about the protests. Everywhere, around the country, everywhere, the protests were fine until they broke curfew and it got really dark, and that allowed troublemakers to hijack the protest. Mm-hmm. And I'm all in favor of cracking down on rioters and insurrectionists, whether they happen to be in somebody's hometown or they're in the Capitol. But I appreciate the fact that people got out, that they took social activism. I did talk to some of the organizers of the Elmhurst one and said, you just need to know that while I support your ability to do this and your freedom to do this, you are hurting people. You don't think you are, but every one of those stores that shut down and or boarded it up lost money. the employees of those stores got sent home. They lost payroll. So while I support, you also need to understand that your actions have an economic impact on our community.
And if I can jump in just
Oh,
to
sure.
tag on what John said, I think those feelings of fear and, oh my gosh, I can't believe we have to close, was amplified so greatly because for many of those businesses, they had literally just reopened their doors. They literally just for the first week or two had had people back in and then were closing up again. And they were so afraid to lose that little bit of momentum that they had just reopening.
One report I had gotten at the North Avenue, York Street location was that there were a couple of protesters who started to mouth off and say things, and I heard other protesters say, "That's not what we're here for. Be quiet, leave. We have a different mission." And so the protesters themselves were self-policing.
Well, I think, we've all at various times talked about the quality of life in Elmhurst, and in an odd way, even the protests reinforced that, at least for me. The protest in Wilder Park, the gathering at North and York, and other kinds of activities at that point. It isn't that there weren't any, worrisome moments, because there were, but overall, the people that were there to show support of a cause and a kind of a feeling and a movement, if you will. And I think the other thing is, and Erin, you touched on this, this is my opinion, but I'll share it anyway. If people would rely on their longstanding relationships to get their news and get their views and find out what's real and what isn't, as opposed to the relationships that we all have on various social media platforms, I think we'd be a lot better served too. I mean, if you've got a concern, what's the first rule if you see something that doesn't look normal? You're supposed to call the authorities and say, I saw something that doesn't look normal. That's what they're there for. But to use those relationships to actually move things forward so that things don't get out of hand. At the same time, as Erin said, by that time we'd had some closures, we had some reopenings. The pandemic is obviously still a very unknown, unusual factor. How do you think Elmhurst was, the business community, how were they processing at that point in time? I mean, we know all the ups and downs and the changes, but right at that moment when we're shut down, maybe for the first time, some people haven't reopened, some people get to reopen for a little bit, then we're kind of shut down again for different reasons. What was the tone of things?
I think in some point, if you could even believe it at that point, disbelief. There's just such fear of, we have no idea week to week. And I didn't have, usually I like to be a good resource for our business community, but we didn't know either what was next. And things just kept piling on, and the governor would come on with he was doing daily briefings at that point in time. And there was days that I was just kind of wincing, watching it, because I was so afraid that day he was gonna say, you know what, never mind, we're going back totally to phase 3. Never mind, something else is changing, or something else, curfew everywhere. Some other unexpected ball was going to drop. And I think the business community felt that. I think you and I have talked candidly about this before. There was many business owners that I spoke to who we cried together over the phone, or they just were like, Erin, I'm sorry, I have to vent out every stressful thought I'm having because I can't do it in front of my employees, and I can't do it at home because my husband, my wife, my kids, someone's going to think we're losing our house, and nobody's going to be able to go to college again. I mean, there was just great fear on, we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, the uncertainty side of it was, if there was an obvious, here's where we're at, here's where we think we're going to be in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you need to prep for that thing. They could have gone, okay, I need to put this in place, I need to put that in place, but that wasn't it. They, even in the initial shutdown of bars and restaurants back in November, people were, well, we'll be out of it by December. So it's not, I don't like it, but I'm fine for the month. And I would tell them, no, you're looking at a quarter, probably till the end of the first quarter of the next year before we're in a position to have those things happen again. And so on the city's part and the chamber's part, it was about how much accurate information could we get to how many businesses about what they needed to do to keep their employees safe, to keep their customers safe, to get loan money, grant money, all those kinds of things. And I'll tell you, the city of Elmhurst has done a phenomenal job at moving completely in another direction. So they were moving here and they went, nope, that's not gonna work. We would never do this if not for the pandemic, but we gotta do it, and we're gonna do it. We're not gonna wait and after the pandemic do a look back and go, we probably should have done outside dining in parking spaces, and we probably should have done this. They acted all to the benefit of businesses, and I give the city credit for that.
It's a constantly changing environment, and the buzzword during the pandemic has been pivot. People were pivoting to the point they were going in circles, but it seemed like every day there was a new guideline or a new restriction or you can do that, but you can't, and interesting. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about some specifics that both the city and the chamber did for the businesses and the people, overall community of Elmhurst. This is Elmhurst, Our Community. We'll be right back. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Welcome back to Elmhurst, Our Community. I'm Ken Bartels. I'm talking with Erin Jason of the City of Elmhurst and John Quigley from the Elmhurst Chamber. And we're talking about economic development within the context and the framework of the pandemic. So what were, for a question for both of you, what were the first steps that respectively Erin, you did in your role as business development coordinator, and John, the chamber's role? What were the first steps that you did for business? You've already shared that, providing information, but what's the first specific step that you recall was taken?
Well, for us, we totally revamped our website almost overnight to have as much of the resource information available at one click, and if you wanted it at 11 o'clock at night, you could find that information. We also pivoted the Explore Elmhurst Facebook page to start immediately sharing business information instead of events, because obviously things were closed for the duration. But truly the first thing I did, you asked earlier about when did you really realize how significant this was going to be. It was when I had to pull the car over and I called the city manager and the assistant city manager, and we were on a group call together, and I said, we're going to have to call every restaurant and make sure we know who's going to stay open for takeout, who's going to try to pivot their restaurant, and it just kept building from there. So I don't know that there was one specific moment, but in terms of after that initial rush, the first thing we started doing was planning for when businesses were able to reopen. So to John's earlier point, I sat down with the city planner and with the assistant city manager, and then we brought Public Works in and the police department in, and we just kept building this grouping of, okay, fitness places are eventually going to be able to reopen. They're probably going to be able to use outdoor space before they're allowed to be inside. So what space do we have available, and how can we put together a program for the city council to approve? And same with outdoor dining. How do we expand outdoor dining and let them maximize as best we can? And we did that for other businesses as well. How do you have, major sidewalk sales all the time and different pieces along those lines? So we were always planning. I think the biggest piece of that for me was that many people don't understand that City Hall, the doors may have been locked for, I think it was like 6 weeks at City Hall, you couldn't publicly come in, but city staff was continuously working. Our public works was divided up. They were in different areas, different quadrants, so that if anybody got sick in any one department, they didn't infect everyone else. And same with City Hall. We were split into 2 teams, so I did work from home 2 days a week at the beginning for a few weeks, but it was the rest of the week I was in person, and even in those 2 days, I was often, in Elmhurst still driving around talking to people.
I remember one of the first things I remember happening, and it wasn't the first thing, obviously, but all of a sudden the carry-out signs showed up. And all of a sudden you realized how many restaurants we really do have downtown, as opposed to, sort of blithely ignoring that, oh yeah, look at all these restaurants. John, I mean,
Yeah, in March of 2020, the Chamber unveiled its Dine Out from Home COVID page. And it listed nearly 100 bars and restaurants, not all of them Chamber members, but Elmhurst businesses. And we had their name, their address, their phone number, a link to their website, a link to their online ordering system if they had it. It included their days of operations and hours of operations. And it include whether they did curbside pickup, drive-through takeout, walk-in takeout, or delivery. And that page, we just took it down. That's how confident we are. But for the 13 months it was up, it was the most visited page on our website. And more importantly, the visits, while strong in Elmhurst, were really strong from Cook County. It was people wanting to come out and take advantage of our restaurants. And then on social media, our Facebook and Twitter pages turned completely around, and we started sharing good news about any member doing anything. And we regularly did, hey, you can get kebabs at this place today. You can do, we didn't care whether or not that was part of their membership package or anything. We just shared it. Sure. And oh, by the way, number of likes, number of page visits increased as well. And people shared what we were posting as well. So that built up business.
Strictly an outsider perspective on the pandemic, looking down, would probably be struck with all of the things that were done for restaurants and bars. It seemed like that there were an awful lot of things that were done for them. But people forget that even when other businesses were allowed to be open and have folks in their stores again, restaurants and bars to a great extent were not.
Yeah.
So, the lifelines that were being provided from the city and the support from the chamber and other organizations as well, bars and restaurants got a lot of attention because there was a real fear that we were going to lose a lot of them.
Well, when the unemployment numbers got to 25 million, huge. Those are Depression era numbers. 16 million of those employees were in the food and beverage industry. Right. So they accounted for 60 to 70%, and they got hit the hardest. We helped other businesses. You try to as best you can, but the reality was those businesses needed to stay open. They needed to find. We were all on the DuPage County Business Outlook earlier this week, and the Top Chef winner, first Top Chef winner, Rick Bayless, was on talking about it, and he let loose with, we've never done delivery or takeout from any of our restaurants.
Right.
But we started to, and he even admitted he's never done takeout himself, even so much as a pizza. So there you see situations where the business accepted the shift. This isn't what I planned to do, this isn't what I wanted to do, but I have to do it.
And if I could jump in and add there, especially with restaurants, there's a tremendous expense with that pivot. those takeout containers, not only are they not cheap, they were really hard to get a hold of. Ken and John, you know this, my husband's in the hospitality industry. They were like borrowing and stealing takeout containers for their establishment, and that was one of the same issues we were seeing here in Elmhurst. And then there was staffing issues because you can't afford to keep everyone on a payroll when you don't have the full staff. And there were so many of our restaurant owners who tried to keep everyone they could employed during this, which is, I mean, we've heard so much reach back from employees praising their bosses on what they did to help them and their families throughout, which is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling. But I do want to add too, I think one of the really important things to note when we say Elmhurst did a lot for our restaurants, we did also freeze all the fees for any other business license. We worked with everybody else the best we could in ways to help them, and a really huge part of making that happen was the City Council's commitment to whatever needs to get done for our business community, we will do. And a very large, that started immediately with Steve Morley, who is in his last few days as mayor in Elmhurst as we record this, doing an executive order, like from day one to say, you know, that he has executive powers during this. And the City Council has consistently voted to continue those executive powers, which allowed us, as all that uncertainty bumped us along the road over the last 12 plus months, to immediately take action. And some of those actions, like last fall, John mentioned when the restaurants had to reclose, when we started those tier restrictions, immediately Steve Morley recognized that we had just sent out renewals for everyone. You know, liquor licenses, the prices had been reduced for the year for those who were restaurants and bars and whatnot, but they were just about to get another bill for 2 months. And he said immediately, with an executive order, let's freeze the collection of all those fees until the Public Affairs and Safety Committee or Development Planning and Zoning, whichever was the appropriate group, reviewed that and made a final action. And that just, I saw people physically like, oh, okay, thank you, Mayor, like, thank you, City. And I would be remiss, I feel like we've all worked crazy. John and his crew have, like, the only chamber around who have still been doing events and taking care of our business community from a different angle. And city staff, we're all, you know, we're running, but it's exhausting, and it was exhausting for those business owners. And I just would be remiss if I didn't say to the City Council, thank you for all that they have done, and that I know they plan to continue. Alderman Levin, now Mayor-elect Levin, one of the first things he did when he came to City Hall after the elections was come into my office and say, Erin, let's keep moving forward. I can't wait to sit down with you and how we can continue to help our business community, and that's so important.
You know, a savvy restaurateur would have packed their takeout stuff in toilet paper, and you would have doubled your business by people trying to track down toilet paper and a meal.
A lot of them gave a free roll with an order.
I think, Erin, though, I mean, I think I'm correct in this, John. The Elmhurst Chamber was the only chamber in DuPage County that never closed.
Correct. And we were the only chamber still doing live events in the third quarter of 2020, and we were doing them safely, socially distanced, masked, all that kind of stuff. No other chamber, not just in DuPage County, no other chamber in Chicagoland were doing anything.
So we're trying to do all these good things and doing a lot of them, but we're also hearing about other communities, you know, are putting up tents and they're closing streets and whatnot. And the city elected not to do that. But then we start opening up the roadways, the downtown parklets, whatever the official term is that you will know.
On-street parking.
Yeah, well, that too. Where did that come from, and how did it go?
First it went extremely well. It was very popular, to the point where 2 of our aldermen last fall put in a referral saying, hey, we think even beyond the pandemic, you should look at ways to expand outdoor dining. And I can't tell you the amount of calls we got from people who said, you saved our business by letting us really spread and maximize the outdoor space as best they could, all the way. We told people, I remember calling Steve Riley, and he said, Erin, like, I'm getting rid of my barricades now, but when do I have to take the rest of my inside tables out? And I said, Steve, if there's one business in this town where I could see their patrons throwing on their winter hat and coat and sitting out there with a heater watching a Bears game, it's your folks. And they did. Yeah, John's raising his hand. I know. It was one of my favorite Facebook posts I'd ever seen when snow was just piling down and people were sitting outside O'Reilly's eating chicken fingers and watching football, and it was fantastic. And that all started with conversations that myself and city planner Eileen Franz, Mike Kopp, the assistant city manager, Kent Johnson, who's a city engineer, and Kim McGrew, who's a superintendent of streets. I mean, we had just started meeting over and over again early. I mean, places closed in March. We were having these conversations by April 1st of, we have to start thinking about this. And it used to be that if you had a liquor license and you had outdoor dining, you had to be fenced in. And it used to be that you could only be on one side of the sidewalk as long as you kept an ADA, 60-inch clearance. And we said, listen, when they reopen, they're not going to be able to be right next to each other again. And 6 feet was already kind of a standard nomenclature of, get away from me, 6 feet. So we started planning with that in mind. And then we went to the city center and we talked to a couple different restaurant owners, and we called in a bunch of restaurant owners and said, listen, this is what we're thinking before we bring it to the city council. What do you think? I mean, we wanted that buy-in, and we did exhaustively look at other alternatives. Should we close down XYZ street? Should we close down this? Should we move this? Should we get tents? And the reality is some other communities have their restaurants, in 1 or 2 blocks. Our restaurants are all over our entire community, and even in the city center itself, who do you close off the street for and not close off the street for?
Sure.
So we tried to do the safest possible way to have as many people out there as we could, and we've tweaked it even going into 2021. So this year you'll see markings, clear demarcations starting next week. There's been some test strips in front of Sweetberry, but you'll see that we're going to have that ADA 60-inch clear walkway, a clear path between, and we're working with others with barricades and whatnot for this summer, and we'll see going forward, what 2022 looks like.
As part of my West Suburban Chamber exec group that meets monthly, we had outdoor tent meetings in both downtown Glen Ellen and downtown Hinsdale. But they were in a position where nearly every one of their restaurateurs was within a short walking distance of that tent. And so they could serve you, they could bring their food out, do all that. Elmhurst has a little too big a downtown to try and close a street.
And if I have one more thing, sorry, Ken.
Of course.
Something that was very important to us when they first started outdoor dining again was, how do our restaurants bring their employees back? And in some communities, tents went up, and I'm not knocking these communities because we all did what we could to help our businesses. So nobody's way is wrong. It's just what works best in the community you're in. And for some communities, it was like, here's a big communal tent, and go and pick up your dinner from XYZ place, take your takeout, and instead of taking your takeout home, you can share it in this tent and keep the downtown vibrant. For us, it was important that you weren't just coming for takeout again. I mean, takeout is going to continue and has continued to be a very strong business for all of them, but we wanted you to be able to tip a server. We wanted you to be able to sit down and order a glass of wine with your dinner. And that was very important to us, to maximize those tables as best we could in places where they were bringing back service staff.
Well, and then igloos and awnings and heat lamps and just fill in the innovative blanks of that statement. I want to pivot and go to a circumstance, get your opinions. The stimulus bills, the various stimulus, and I'm not talking about the individual checks, but the PPP loans, the state grants, and various. How important were they to Elmhurst faring during the pandemic?
Huge, really big. During the Great Depression, one of the things was the federal government took very little action. Treasury Department, Federal Reserve Bank, they kind of went, well, we're just going to see how it goes. And then during the Great Recession, they kind of tried to do that. And coming out of that, they went, sitting back doesn't work. You got to go all in, because if you don't spend the money now, you'll lose the income when 40% of the businesses close. So you might as well keep them afloat until the economy rebounds. The Fed's already looking at a time where the interest rate's going to be back between 3 and 5%, maybe 3 years from now. And the interest rate's basically been zero for a handful of years. So they already see how it's impacting, how things are growing out of that. I can tell you, it would have been hard for the chamber to keep its doors open without that assistance.
And I would piggyback on that, as when you look at, like, we've talked so much about like the smaller retailers and the restaurants, but look at our business parks. Those were vital funds for so many of them. Not only to pivot and put some of their employees at home and here and whatnot, but there was just total innovation changes. We had a lot of businesses that totally changed what they did prior to the pandemic. We have several companies in our community that do things for trade shows. Well, that industry has completely died for now. And I look at our dry cleaners. I think that's when people say to me, what's still important, what's still struggling? Our dry cleaners and the dry cleaners across the country are really struggling. If this is my public service announcement, if you have dry cleaning that hasn't been picked up since March of 2020, please go get it. I walk in with my husband's suits. We've both been working the whole time, in my dry cleaning, and I see the same dry cleaning circling around all the time, and I hear it from folks over and over again, we still need help. And I think sometimes people forget that, but those PPP loans, the EIDL loans, Reinvest Your Page, that's what I was going to say.
Business interruption grant.
Yeah, the big grants were a little bit trickier for the Elmhurst area, but we did have businesses who credit their survival on that they were able to get a big grant. So every dollar helps. That goes both from getting grant dollars and from getting business. Business dollars help.
So every day now we're hearing that another state is going to open up in July or June, or they're talking about opening up, and by opening up, pretty much quote unquote back to normal. There'll still be some degree of restrictions in some areas, but as Illinois has made no call at this point, but as we look at the current status of Elmhurst businesses, what does it look like to the two of you?
My prediction has been the same prediction for the last several months. June 1, we will move to phase 5 and be open. The city, I think, was looking at July 1 as a more likely date. I can afford to be more optimistic than the city, so I go with June 1. I think by the end of May, based on the number of inoculations that have been happening in the state and in DuPage County, I think our numbers are going to be really good. And the new cases are basically 21 to 40-year-olds. And they've put themselves at risk by partying together in tight groups and doing that kind of stuff. 80% of our elderly is protected. I'm very optimistic.
As John said, the city's probably not as optimistic for a full phase 5, but I look at the full metrics, and the governor announced about a month ago now the bridge phase, and we are meeting the inoculation numbers for that, but not the hospital metrics. And I do think they're still going to, once we hit those hospital metrics, have the 28 days of having those metrics in place before moving to phase 5, because we'll have the inoculation metrics. I think we actually are, if not right at it, very close. I think it was 70% of Illinoisans 16 and over to get us to phase 5. And I know last time I looked, I think we were in the high 60s. So we're definitely on the cusp. But I think mid-June or July 1st is probably, I know the president said, hopefully by 4th of July, we're all enjoying barbecues like we would in a normal year. And I like to think that that's optimistically the July 1st we'll make it there.
So Elmhurst as a community, interestingly enough, with all the challenges, and some challenges met well, some challenges met not quite so well, we're also enjoying a number of new businesses opening up and planning to open up very soon. And I just want to give primarily you, Erin, an opportunity to just tick a few of those off, just to sort of whet people's appetites for what's just ahead or actually already happening.
Yeah, right on the cusp. We've just had the openings for Ming Chef, which took over the space that that Rainbow Cafe was before they moved to their new location a few years ago. That's the group from Joy Yi restaurants that are popular in the Chicagoland area. Poke Burrito opened recently. People are thrilled with them to date. Dairy Queen is on the cusp of opening. Capri Restaurant is in their final stages of review before they can open. I announced actually just right before I came here that Harlow Grill, they're in Melrose Park for, gosh, I think since the 20s. They're opening up in Elmhurst where Mr. G's used to be. And Mr. G's, Steve, did an insanely great job during the pandemic, but he was like, Erin, I'm ready to retire, and I think that's a hard line. Sometimes people think, well, we lost this business, we lost this business. Some businesses, people were like, we're done, we're ready to retire, and we don't want to put up with this. So it'll be interesting to see going forward. We do have some others that are not quite ready to be announced yet, but there are leases in place at a couple other businesses that look dark right now, that as soon as they're ready for us to announce, yes, we're ready to go, we will be sharing that out. But I think it's important to note that we're at less than 3% vacancy in the city center, in the downtown business district, and overall, we're just hovering around 5%, and that's with all industries. And that's a crazy thing for us to be proud of as a community.
At our most recent EEDC meeting, Elmhurst Economic Development Commission, I pointed out that, after 9/11, Elmhurst and DuPage County rebounded quicker than other counties in Illinois and across the country. After the Great Recession of 2007-09, the same thing happened. We're seeing the same thing happen again. We're getting new businesses that want to come in. Home sales are booming. There's like competitive bids on every home going up the moment it goes up. Those are all good indicators. And most of our neighboring communities aren't seeing a fraction of that kind of interest.
So, thoughts from each of you going into the summer? What can we look forward to?
I'm very optimistic. I think just all good things ahead. There's new population moving in, as we mentioned at the beginning. The residents there are moving in. We have new restaurants opening. We have new businesses opening. As John mentioned, and one of my favorite quotes from one of our commercial brokers who lives in town, the deck has been shuffled and people want to be in Elmhurst. And I love helping people make that happen for them. And I think it's in such large part to our city council, but also to the residents. So thank you, if you're residents who are watching, thank you for supporting our businesses, because I can't express to you how many times I heard from business owners, if it wasn't for Elmhurst residents really stepping up and supporting local and thinking local first, this wouldn't be possible. And I just think we're full steam ahead 2021 into 2022.
A year ago, I gave the prediction that I expected at least 20% of Elmhurst's 2,500 businesses to close their doors and never reopen. A couple months after that, given how restaurants were struggling, I said, we'll be lucky if we get out of here at 40%. But the pivot on the restaurants saved a bunch of those businesses. It saved other businesses that did curbside handouts on sales. I think 15 to 20% drop in businesses will be where we're at after this all flushes out, and we will have recruited that same number to replace that.
Well, thank you both for joining me. Another spirited discussion among the three of us, which is no surprise. But that's our Elmhurst, our community for today. I also want to say that this business zone, which has also been closed, we'll also be reopening it in the relatively near future. We don't have an actual date yet, but we'll get that publicized as well. So for Erin Jason and John Quigley, I'm Ken Bartels. This has been Elmhurst, our community, and we'll see you again. The Community Bank of Elmhurst Business Zone has modern co-working space and a conference room free for our business customers. Visit the zone today at communityelmhurst.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.